Okay, why don't we get started? I'm Alexis. It's nice to meet everyone. I'm going to be moderating the session and managing the chat. If you need any help at any time, just let me know. And I just wanted to take a minute to introduce our group. And then we're going to dive right into some questions that we have. And the session's really meant to be interactive. So, we welcome your participation. I just think this is an incredible opportunity to meet representatives from these amazing schools and get a chance to speak in this pretty relatively small Zoom room. So thanks for being with us. Okay, so by way of introduction, we have Emily Singer from Princeton. Hi, Emily. And Eloise Hyman from University of Chicago. I'm just going to say I'm an alum of the University of Chicago. I'm just not going to let that bias me in any way when I moderate. We have Caroline Damon from Middlebury. Hi, Caroline. And we have Tom Mcgovern from University of Virginia. Welcome, Tom. Thank you to the four of you for making time to be with our students and our parents today. We really appreciate it. So let me just make sure I'm admitting a few people here. Everyone in. And we'll just dive right into questions. And again, this is meant to be interactive. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, ask the question in the chat. And then we'll leave plenty of room at the end, probably at least 15 minutes for Q&A. So I have my questions. So if I'm looking off screen, that's what I'm doing. Okay, so, and this is to nobody in particular. So jump in when you have your, when you have a question that resonates with you or your or about your school. So how well do the criteria used in the admissions process predict future college success? And do colleges track their students' four-year GPAs and look for correlations with admissions data? What kinds of trends are you seeing in this area?
My goodness, this is a question for a dean, but I will try my very best as an assistant director. So most certainly, the whole point of our admission criteria is to hopefully predict and ensure success of students on our campuses. So I would say for Princeton, we do very specifically look at how applications and how students that we've admitted, how they do at Princeton. What are those outcomes? For a student that has had this level of coursework previously, how do they fare in introductory courses of different various levels? We specifically really see this when we're talking about our engineering school or for STEM programs. We really want to see what does having higher level mathematics look like in high school, and how do students perform as a result of having those classes or not having access to those classes. Now, I think oftentimes what is a little bit difficult for us is obviously we have no impact over what is offered at the high school level. We would want for students to have incredible opportunities, but that is sometimes not always the case, right? So we are always evaluating students within their setting and looking at what is offered to students, where they are, what is reasonable for them to be able to take on based upon their high school and where they are. So that won't put students at a disadvantage in our process. But of course, we want to set students up for success. And of course, a huge part of setting students up for success is having data and looking at that for the students that do end up matriculating and coming to our campuses. How are they doing? What does that look like? And where can we fill in with support services and structures on our campuses to ensure that success? Things from tutoring centers, learning centers, smaller classes, more individualized attention, whatever that may look like for our various institutions.
Thank you.
I think it's also important to note too that at all the institutions you find here, but I also imagine at many, if not most of the institutions that you have met with today, outcomes are very, very good. The retention rates are incredibly high. Students are doing well in their first year. They're sticking around after that. They're going on to graduate not only on time, but incredibly well, and pursuing opportunities in their given fields. And so not only are we just looking at what students have done and before they come to high school and how that's affected how they've been prepared to move through our institutions, but we're also looking to see what are students doing after they graduate? Are they going on into the fields that they're interested in? How that placement looks, what we can do to work with the students that we're working with ahead of time before coming to our institutions, to make sure that they're prepared for the opportunities they're going to have at our institutions. So those students who come to our institutions are doing incredibly well, not just at our institutions and beyond. And that's all information that you guys can access typically publicly.
Fantastic. Thank you. And on the next question, what procedures do you have in place to measure fairness in your process? And what kind of follow-up do you do on your decisions?
Can you clarify the second part of that question? What do you mean by follow-up with decisions?
Just to determine, to track fairness and sort of look back and assess whether how fairness has been applied throughout the process.
Sure. I mean, I will say this is an incredibly context-driven process. This has already been mentioned of students are not just viewed as generally in their state or city, they're high school. So we are only evaluating students within the context exactly of what opportunities they had. We are not expecting anything more. We are not expecting anything different. We are expecting what that student has had the opportunity to do, whether that's classes, extracurriculars, anything else. We're also, again, it's an incredibly context-driven process of understanding that when we're talking about things like extracurriculars, not having specific checklists of things we need to see, because we know that there are many different ways that students can and will engage, things like understanding some students will need to have a part-time job and what that can mean for students, family responsibilities, but also long commutes to school, right? That can be factored in of understanding that students might not have the same opportunity to get involved after school or what their day-to-day might look like, because some students are traveling. I've seen up to a couple hours in commute every single day just to go to school. So those are all things that we're taking into consideration in addition to what those other resources might look like. And this process, there's a huge amount of training that goes into it to make sure that we are, understanding internalized bias, how we can take that out of our process, an incredibly human process, understanding different things that readers might look at differently. That's also, I will have different people evaluating applications. Now, every institution is different in how exactly their process works, but it's never going to be one person just looking at something and making the final decision. There are many checks and balances throughout to measure this kind of, as you've put it, fairness of making sure that every student is given due process to make sure that they're given the most chances to be looked at, evaluated within their context, and as a potential member of our community.
Thank you. And from the student's perspective, then, there's so many things to consider, right? You're just enumerated all the different contexts in which the student sits. From the student's perspective, sort of, what are your thoughts on what students should concentrate on light of their applications and sort of in light of all of this, all the factors that come in and the fact that it's very hard to have, I don't know what the average is, something like 10 to 15 minutes per application that you're able to sort of really dive in and look. How do you balance, from a student's perspective, what should they emphasize in their application that will allow them to kind of stand out given all these considerations that you just mentioned?
I guess I can start with this again, so I want to quickly mention the time framing that you've given there. Every application is given the amount of time that it needs. And what I mean by that is As professionals, when evaluating applications, how long it takes me to read an application is going to be different than how it would for an average high schooler looking through. But it's also, as I already mentioned, every institution has different processes by which they evaluate applications. So I very much want to highlight these numbers that get thrown out and put in news articles. I don't really know where they come from. It's very much based. It's incredibly. It's something that is very much dependent on the office and exactly how a person is reading. The applicant gets the time it deserves, and in a holistic review, every piece of an application is read. I think that's the important thing. Every piece of the application is read. What students should be focusing on is making sure that they are representing themselves completely, but knowing that it's a representative view and not a comprehensive view. So focusing on the pieces, when they're going through the pieces of the application, making sure that they're giving representation of themselves, how they engage, and specific to what each question is asking along the way. I don't know if one of my colleagues wants to sort of chime in there for what those pieces look like.
Yeah, I'll jump off the end of that too and just say every single school that you're applying to is going to ask you for what they need to review your application in its entirety in the context of their admission pool. A lot of those things are probably going to be similar, and a lot of those things are probably going to be different from institution to institution. So when you're filling out, especially if you're filling out the common application and you're applying to a bunch of schools, if you're filling out their supplements, make sure you're really reading what they're asking from you, because we're not just asking you for random bits of information that we're then never going to look at. If we are asking you something on our application, it's because we are really interested in delving deeply into what you provide us with, because it matters in our application review. That all being said, follow the instructions. If we're asking you a question, answer the question that we're asking you. If we tell you we will not look at something in your application, or we won't accept different supplemental materials, don't send us those supplemental materials. We really mean it. It's not just like I know they said we don't look at resumes, but you should send them a resume anyways. We tell students we cannot consider resumes in our review process. Put everything that's on your resume in the honors and awards, in the extracurricular activities sections. Don't send us a resume, because again, I won't be able to use it in our admission review, even if I do see it. So follow the instructions that schools are giving you, because we're going to ask for the stuff that we need. And we're going to spend a lot of time with the things that we're asking for.
I think I would also just add that, in terms of what the question about what we want students to emphasize or sort of really get into in their application is a tricky one, in part because I think all of our jobs are to help sort of build a class at our institutions. And we're not looking for carbon copies, of students. We're looking for a really diverse array of students who bring different perspectives and are going to add to our different communities in all kinds of ways. And so I just want to sort of say that I think rather than trying to think about what to emphasize or trying to fit yourself into a mold that you think that our colleges and others, that are also highly selective are looking for, we want you to emphasize who you are. And I think you've gotten some great advice on how to do that, but I think it's just really important to remember that too. And it's probably kind of annoying advice to hear too, because you're like, yeah, well, I am myself. How am I supposed to say that to you? But really, just make sure that you are in that application as yourself. Don't, if you're not a funny person, don't try to be funny in your application in some way. Just be true to yourself, and we're going to have what we need, as has been said, to make good decisions, for our institutions, and to try to, again, kind of suss out that fit between you and the institution. This is so helpful. Emily, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think my colleagues did a fantastic job. One little piece of advice that I always tell students when they're focused on how we're looking at things or how we're reviewing things or what goes on behind our closed doors, this is a beautiful exercise in letting go of things you can't control or change, applying to college. And I say that in jest a little bit, of course, like you're going to be focused in on how we're reading those applications and what's going on and trying to understand it. I do understand that, but your focus, your emphasis should really be on what you're crafting. Are you putting it together an application that you are proud of? Are you sharing all of the facets of yourself that you find incredibly important? If you were meeting a new friend and you were looking to connect with them, you would share all these similar things, right? There are things that are ingrained in you that make you you. That's what you should be focusing on when you're putting together an application. Again, as Eloise said, not the amount of time that we're going to spend reading it. You don't have any control over that, do you? So don't worry about that. Instead, worry about the pieces that you can focus in on, right? Doing really well, continuing your great hard work in school, putting that effort in filling out supplements. Those are all things that you can control.
This is great. So helpful. Thank you. I wanted to turn to two other components of the process, testing and essays. So let's just start with testing. Some colleges are test optional, others are exploring that path. Do you have any kind of guidance for our students on test optional or testing in general? I mean, we're obviously holding an entire workshop on that, but it would be great to have your point of view on testing.
Yeah, I can start with this one. So I think it's really important to do some research and digging with the colleges that you end up being most interested in to make sure that you know their specifics, because I think everybody is probably a bit different. And of course, we're all coming to you on this panel from our own institutions, and we all have sort of our ways of doing things. But we are all of our colleges are test optional. And that is for Middlebury, that's, the second of a 3-year pilot program that we're involved in. And we're not trying to be sneaky or tricky or deceptive in any way by saying we're test optional. For us, that really truly means we are test optional. We know that the conditions for taking tests and preparing for tests make it very difficult and sometimes impossible to do any of that right now, given the pandemic. And so that is a stress point that you can just take off your plate if you need to. And if you have taken tests, because that's been available to you, and you don't feel like they're representative of your academic accomplishments or potential, then you don't have to submit them, because that's what test optional means. That's what it means for us. So I'll just leave it at that and let others chime in too.
I think, Caroline, you really handled that beautifully. I agree with everything that you've said.
And then let's talk about the essay. What are you looking for in an admissions essay? I'm going to leave it kind of broad and open.
I can start with this. Great personal statement. We are trying to understand more about you and your words. Really, that's what it is. It's a reflective essay talking about something that is important to you generally. I know oftentimes the question is it cliche to write about X? Well, no, because every student will have a different life experience with X. And I'm interested in knowing your experience, right? If you're writing about a sporting event, right? The match at the end of the season, nobody else on your team should be able to write the same essay, because I'm not actually interested in the play-by-play. I'm interested in why is this so important to you? You're telling me about it. As long as you make sure that you're answering specific to you, specific to what's going to be the most genuine for you, that's all you should focus on. Now, supplemental essays, those are where universities tell you very specifically things that are important to them. There are two main kinds, the why us essay and the intellectual thought exercise. Now with why, insert institution here, what students really need to make sure they're focusing on is answering that question. Why use Chicago is not why do I want to go to college? It's not why do I want to study physics? It's why do I want to attend the University of Chicago for the next 4 years of my life? So going a bit deeper, thinking about the community of an institution. Now, if a school is asking you, why do you want to study physics at your school here? then great, you can answer that question. But it's very important to answer the question you were actually asked and not answering the question you wish we had asked you instead. So making sure to be very specific and reading fully what the entire question is asking you. The intellectual thought exercise is usually about the universities, maybe as bluntly as saying, this is a key tenet of our institution. Tell us how this fits in to you, or how you fit into this, right? Your worldview, whatever it is. Some schools are a little bit more abstract. I would say Chicago, we're known for this, of asking very out of the box questions. But the reason that schools are asking this intellectual thought exercise question is to understand a little bit more about you as a potential member of their community and how you fit into the way that they think. With these abstract questions, the reason I'm asking them is I want to see, how do you think? How do you face the unfamiliar? It's really important then to make sure you are answering the questions again that you were asked. Take risks and look at how the universities are asking these questions, because all of our websites give instructions. You know, they tell you a bit about how we are hoping you will answer these and how you should be thinking about them. The biggest advice I have here is to never recycle an essay. I know that is it. Even if you think that you've written another essay that generally could fit in kind of to what you're being asked, never, ever recycle an essay. It's very clear when you've done this. And frankly, especially at the highly selective level, all it does is let us know that, you know, you kind of phoned it in and you're not thinking that deeply about our institution. So make sure, I know it's extra work, but it's really important to take the time to think deeply about these questions, because this is probably the largest decision you've ever had to make as a high school student. I mean, maybe not, I don't know your personal life, but for many students, this is the largest decision. So taking that extra time to write these essays can help you figure out what is important to me and why this school.
So helpful. Thank you. Emily, Tom, or Caroline?
I will just add my favorite piece of advice for students on essays. I think, you know, my favorite essays to read are the ones where I hear your voice and I can I like, you're in my head a little bit because your voice is so clear in that essay. And it really doesn't matter, as Eloise was saying, like what you're writing about. I mean, you can write about whatever moves you, but if I'm hearing your voice, I'm feeling connected and I think I'm understanding you in a different way when I hear that. So one way that could be helpful to you to like test out whether your voice is in that essay is to get it to a place where you think it's pretty much done or there, and then go into a room where you have privacy and quiet. It can be your closet or a bathroom if it needs to be, and like read your essay out loud to yourself. And if the words like come out of your mouth and it's pretty effortless to speak your essay to yourself, then I think your voice is there and you can feel good about that. And if you're stumbling because you tried to put in a fancy word that you don't actually use in your regular, you know, everyday life, you might want to adjust, you know, some of those places. But I do think that the best essays are the ones where the student's voice is really there, and however it works for you to get your voice into that piece of writing, it is, I think, yeah, that's my kind of favorite piece of advice to give.
I would just jump onto that too to say, I think one of the areas that we get a lot of questions of students coming to us for advice or because they're having difficulties is with that idea of topic and wanting to make sure they're telling us what we want to hear. And so, you know, with that topic, again, it's really less about the specific thing. There is no perfect topic, right? It's what topic is going to show us the world through your eyes. One of our supplemental essays that is optional is what's your favorite word and why? Students are going to have to work really hard to convince me their favorite word is rotunda. I have read thousands of essays of students telling me their favorite word is rotunda. There have been a couple of really good ones, right? If your favorite word really is rotunda, I will be able to tell. But really, what that does is it tells me you think that I want to hear that your favorite word is rotunda. So for students who are writing these essays, the better I know your voice, the easier it's going to be for me to sit up and fight for you in our committee meetings. If I don't feel like I've gotten to know you in that essay because you're trying to contort yourself into the boxes you think we want you to check, that doesn't mean that I won't think you're a good applicant, but it will mean that I won't be able to use that essay to really fight for you in our review. So write about something that lets us see the world through your eyes rather than a specific topic.
This is fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to the group. And I love this emphasis on hearing the student's voice. I want to turn to when we hear the voices of others, which is letters of recommendation. So what is your approach to letters of recommendation generally? And for teachers and others who are writing, dozens of these during the applications process, what is it that really that you're looking for in those letters from others?
I'll get us started on this, and I think we can kind of separate it out into two categories. So for students, for letters of recommendation, advice for that, please take a wide look at your schools and figure out, where you're looking to apply and figure out what letters are going to be required. The sooner you can do this, if you can do this at the end of your junior year or even before then, that is fantastic. That is when you should be figuring out, okay, what academic teachers do I need to ask? Some schools will have requirements where you're supposed to get one from a STEM teacher and one from a humanities teacher. Some schools will, or some colleges will say, whatever teachers you'd like. There's no parameters on it. Some will require a letter of recommendation from a school counselor. Others will not. It's important to know what is required because these letters do have quite a significant impact, especially for highly selective schools in the application process. They are the folks that are really speaking about who you are within their community day in and day out. So you want to choose teachers and administrators that know you well and can speak to your abilities, not only in the classroom, but also who you are as a human being, who you are as a person in that community. That can be really difficult, especially with the pandemic. So really thinking through what can you do to help teachers get to know you? Sometimes that's providing them additional information about what you do outside of the classroom, or a little bit of context of what schools you're applying to and why you're looking to apply to those schools. Those can be really helpful for counselors and teachers when they are looking to go to write a letter of recommendation. For teachers, for counselors, what are we looking for? I think I can speak for the group here and say that they don't need to be super long. We get so tired of reading. So they do not need to be super long. They can be bulleted lists. They can be, the really high points of that student. They don't have to be very, very long 3-page letters telling us about every single interaction you've ever had. I think when they're most helpful, they're not giving us a list of just general characteristics, right? It's really great to think of all the words that mean kind and put them all together, or, that's great, but it doesn't really give us anything. It doesn't give us any texture there. So I really find very helpful if you can give an example of things that students do that really demonstrate that specific character element that you're looking to hit on, or about, a time where you saw a student do something. And just as we're asking the students to really think of those examples or think of things that are tangible, those pieces in letters can be incredibly helpful. And of course, if that relationship is a bit deeper, if the student has asked someone that knows them well, that is when the letter is most effective to us. We also take into context here your high school context. So we understand for some schools that have 10,000 students in them, those letters are probably going to be shorter. The counselor letter may not be possible. And generally for our schools, that's going to be okay. That's something where we're going to evaluate something within a context, right? If a counselor only has 100 students on their caseload versus the counselor has 1,000 students on their caseload, we know to expect a little bit of a different letter. That won't put students at a disadvantage in the process. And that is not something that the school should really worry about. As long as they are doing their best with what they have and what they can do, we appreciate them writing on that student's behalf just to begin with.
So helpful to know. Thank you. Eloise, Caroline, or Tom, do you have anything to add to that? Well,
Your teachers' thank you notes, handwritten thank you notes. They're doing you a huge favor. Write them thank you notes.
same, handwritten thank you notes to the people who write your letters of recommendation. Fantastic. Good to know. Well, we have some incredible students on our Zoom and wanted to open it up to questions. I encourage you to ask any question you want. I covered a broad range and didn't go into much detail on a lot of this. So whatever question is piquing your interest, we have plenty of time. Susie.
Yeah, hi. So I was wondering, when you're applying to highly selective colleges, there's obviously like such a large group of students that have like the grades, the courses, and the test scores. What do you use to really distinguish like whether a student is a good fit for your school out of students that have very similar extracurriculars, scores, grades, things like that?
I can start with this. For some schools, and again, highly selective, not a monolith. So it can be, different, also depending on what supplemental materials exist. For some, it can be those supplemental essays. That's why I also highlighted before, if a school has supplemental essays, it's very important to be specific to the questions they're asking. But otherwise, it is important to know when we're thinking about highly selective admissions, and I mean admissions in general, we're building a class. We're not building, for just one major at a time, right? We're looking to have the most diverse class of students to come to our campus, and diversity means many different things, right? It can be academic interests, it can be ways of engaging with the community, right? Leaders, as well as those who might not be in leadership positions, but are great members of their community in other ways, right? And there are institutional priorities of what an institution might be looking for in a given year. Emily, I think it was Emily mentioned before, unfortunately, in the college process, this is really about letting go of what you can't control. You can't control what a college is looking for at a specific time. So it's really important for you to just make sure that you are focusing as much as you can on yourself in this process and making sure your voice comes through. I know that that's sort of been mentioned a couple of times as well. If you dropped a stack of essays on the ground and your mom and your best friend picked up yours, without your name on it, they should know you wrote it. So focusing on what you can control, of making sure that you are coming across, because how do you know you're not exactly what we're looking for, right? So really just focusing on those pieces of you and that you're being as specific as possible.
I'd also like to add that I think oftentimes as a high schooler, you're like, is it this person or me? And I think none of our offices do it like that. We're not comparing applicants one to another. Software doesn't even really work like that. You usually can only open one application at a time. And that's really done by design. We're focusing in on you when we're reading your application. I'm not thinking about, Tom and Kelly when I'm reading Susie's application. I'm just focusing on what Susie has to bring. And that's a really important distinction to make. It's not comparative.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
A great question, Susie. Thank you. Others have questions? I've been trained in the long pause. So I want to give people plenty of opportunity. I have other questions I can ask, but I definitely want to give space for anyone who wants to ask. So I'll pose, Susie, did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, I have one more. So if you're applying to a specific major that's more competitive, is there any advice on just like how to apply when you're applying to a specific major and maybe that major is specifically competitive at your school?
I will say this is going to vary from school to school. I mean, I at some schools, I can speak for us, you don't apply into a major at all. You apply into our one college. So unfortunately, and I think that is similar for other schools in this room and many of our highly selective peers. So your experience may vary.
I can sort of answer around this too. We don't admit students to majors because we know that most students are going to change their minds at least once when they're in college. If you're like me and you're really lucky, you'll change your major 3 times and it'll be fantastic. But most students will change their mind at least once. And so we always like to have a sense of what we think students are going to be interested in doing, but we're not holding them accountable for that because we know that they're going to grow and change wherever they end up, wherever they choose to go. There are some programs at some schools that have more specific requirements or more specific things that they're looking for. So it is really important to make sure that you know when you're applying to a college or university, what program are you applying to within that program? For some schools, it's just going to be one application to the general college. For us, there are specific schools within UVA, and most students are going to apply to our College of Arts and Sciences, which is where most of our academic programs are. But we do have other schools, a school of architecture, a school of nursing, a school of engineering, where students would apply in as first-year students. None of those programs for us are easier or harder to get into than one another. There's not a different bar or a different academic criteria, but we do look for fit a little bit more. Because we don't want to admit a student to our School of Nursing who actually doesn't want to be a nurse. They actually want to go to medical school. We don't want to admit a student to engineering who's actually interested in astrophysics, right? Because they're going to show up in our engineering school and be miserable. So we do look at fit for those specific schools. I imagine that's also going to be the case at other schools that admit directly to majors or schools. So that's something you should be aware of when you're thinking about applying to a university. Are you just applying to that university generally or that college generally, or are you applying to a specific program?
This is so helpful. I have another question that I'll ask and then open it up again. This is a broad one. If you were to pick sort of one thing that you're most proud of as a representative of your school, as a representative of the University of Chicago, UVA, Princeton, Middlebury, what would you say is the kind of the one thing you're most proud of as a representative?
I'll start us off.
Yeah, go for it.
I think working at a school like Princeton, we are incredibly fortunate to have quite a bit of money that we can utilize in the form of financial aid. So we're committed to meeting 100% of a student's demonstrated need. And I know that that has made the difference for so many of our students. We've gone no loan as of 20 years ago. And so that has had a huge impact. You know, the fact that our graduates are really not graduating with debt, and those that have a small amount of debt is considerably smaller than the national average. Definitely having this incredibly generous financial aid policy is something that is very easy for me to be proud of and really stand behind, because it allows a Princeton education to be that much more affordable for students.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, that definitely is something that I am glad to be working at Chicago, very similar financial aid policies there. But I would say also something that I'm always really excited to talk about is how that extends to when students are on campus as well, with things like research and internships. We are dedicated to making sure that not only are we finding fully funded internships for our students, but that we have significant grant funding available for if a student does find an internship that is not paid or not paid enough. We're looking at cost of living, because if you're living in Chicago or New York or London for a summer, getting you there and keeping you there is going to be pretty different. And we want to make sure that no student ever has to turn down an opportunity due to funding, which I really think is an amazing way to make sure that students are able to take advantage of any opportunities that they would like to do.
I can go next. It's a two-part answer because there are things that I'm really proud of about the institution, and there are also things that our students are doing that make me really proud to be at UVA. The first part, is just to echo our commitment to financial aid and accessibility. We're one of only 2 public universities that is both need blind and committed to meeting 100% of demonstrated need. And so just as a public university that's committed to making excellent education accessible and affordable, I am proud to be at UVA every day. I'm from here in Virginia, so that's a really amazing thing to be a part of. I'm also incredibly proud of the things that our students are doing every day. We have what we call a culture of student self-governance here, which really just means that students are involved in the major decision-making at every level at the university. And so our students are pushing to make the university what they want it to be. And that is an incredible thing to be around. It is so invigorating to be around young people that want to make the world better and aren't afraid of taking on massive, massive societal issues that all of us are facing. And so every day I want to be my best for those students.
Yeah, I love listening to you all because I think so much of it resonates for me, and I don't have much unique to add at this point because I do think, well, Middlebury's, my sort of proud points for Middlebury are accessibility and financial aid, although we are not no loan, but we are low loan. And so it's a little bit different in that way, but it's also, I think, what Tom was getting at with working for an institution that takes the student voice incredibly seriously, to the point where the culture, of course, Middlebury is always Middlebury at its core, but the feeling of being on campus is ever shifting in a way. And I think responding and adapting and listening to students, that, the major initiatives that are happening on campus right now to kind of move us forward in this year at this time are because of students. It's because students come to the table, because they make their voices heard, and the administration at Middlebury is all ears and excited to adapt and work with them to make sure that, what Middlebury is offering is inclusive, is, up to date, is, going to help students kind of reach whatever goal they have for themselves going forward.
I have a really quick question.
Please.
I was just wondering, when do you guys take into consideration the timeline when the application is submitted?
Outside of the decision rounds, as in if you apply for an early round, we know we have to be finished reading it by a certain point versus a regular round. No. Just make sure you focus on the deadline so that it's not 2 weeks past the deadline and you say, oh no, I got the application deadline wrong. I thought it was other school. But otherwise, whether it's a week before or the day the application deadline is due, it does not matter.
But that doesn't mean you can't submit it before. And we would appreciate it. I think it would be better for you, probably better for your school, just because documents also take some time to get to us. And some schools have a little grace period. I know we do at Princeton, where we're like, everything from the student needs to come in on the deadline date or before the deadline date, but we'll give counselors and teachers a little bit more time. Other schools say everything's got to be here by that deadline date. So you'll never be in a worse place by submitting things a little bit early to make sure you have that wiggle room.
I would also
Great
say
question.
too,
Oh,
if
go
you
ahead,
can
Tom.
give yourself space to submit that with a day or two of grace where you will be able to reach us if you have any problems or questions, that is always better than not. It's very hard for us to solve a student's problems in the middle of the night or on the weekend when the phones in our office are shut off. Make sure you just give yourself a day or two of grace. If you need to send us an email, if you need to give us a phone call, that can always be helpful as well.
It's a great question, Peter. And just as a follow-up, is there any timing that matters with respect to financial aid or scholarships in that respect?
This will be different for every institution. There is no blanket answer. So I would just encourage students to go to every institution's website and see exactly what they're asking for and when it needs to be in.
Great advice. Any other questions? We're at the top of the hour. Well, Emily and Caroline and Eloise and Tom, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your perspective with us. This is an invaluable session, and we really appreciate you joining us, especially on a Sunday, virtually after Zoom fatigue. Means a lot for you to join us. So thank you. It means a lot to us that you joined us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining as well to the students that are here and other folks. It's been lovely and grateful for the moderation and nice to see you all. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Thank you all.
guys, for your time. Bye.
Thanks again, everyone. Bye.